Hi everyone, this is Eva. Welcome to Formative's End of Year Exam webinar. During today's webinar, we are going to be looking at a couple of different things, but before we get started, I just want to remind you that this session is being recorded. It will be shared on our training site. It is scheduled for 30 minutes, and you are welcome to type any questions you have into chat. We are going to try and cover quite a bit during this session today. So to get started with that, I want to share with you our goals for this session. If you don't already tag your questions within a formative to your standards, I want to show you how you can do that today. That's going to enable you to do some better data tracking as you are working in formative so that you can really watch the progress of your students over time. We're going to be looking at, the bulk of our time today is going to be spent looking at how you can enhance test security. We have a couple of different ways to help you with some test security options, and that's where we're going to be spending much of our time today. And then, of course, we want to talk about helping you think through some ways to get some more authentic assessments that will also benefit you when you're trying to make sure that your students are not just looking up answers and Googling for the answers. So those are our goals for today. I am going to jump over to my formative document so that we can get started. So in my formative document, I've got a couple of different formatives ready to go to share with you. And I want to first share that if you are pulling something from our formative library, it may already have standards tagged to it. And if it does, if you've pulled something that has some standards tagged to it already, you will see those standards. Those standards will not automatically follow you over into your formatives list. So if earlier today I pulled up one that was called shapes, and I'm going to pull that one up here. I've got two. So this is the first one that I'm going to start with today. If you pull something from our library and it had standards attached to it, it won't automatically bring those standards over, but you will see a notice at the top. And that notice at the very top will ask you if you want to import the standards with the formative. That's helpful because if you use the same standards that were listed there, you can just click yes, and then you don't have to add any more standards. But for many of us, we have to add our standards. If you have never added standards before, there are two ways you can do so, and you only need to do this one time. The first way is within your profile. So if I go to my account information and my settings here, when I click on settings, you'll see that I have quite a few standards listed in already. When you first go here, your standard set will be blank, and you can click here to add any standard set, and you'll see that this is a very long list. We have standards from all over the world, every state in the country, many different countries, many different private schools. If you work at a school where your standards are not currently listed, you can reach out to us if you are a partner school, and we can give you information on how to get your standards uploaded into formative. We upload our standards through the Common Standards Project, and we can help get those in there for you. That's the first way. But if you forget to go there, you don't have to upload them from there. You can upload them straight from the formative itself. So when you first go in and you're adding your question type, down here under your question where it says tag to standards, you're going to see I have many standards already in here. But if yours is blank, you can add the new standard set straight from here, add it the first time, and that's the only time you'll have to do that. All right, well, let's start with looking at question types. One of our goals for today was to look at some different types of assessment measures so that when you are giving your students these options, it's not just multiple choice and true false. Those questions are not the most authentic when it comes to really assessing what our students know. And so I have a multiple choice question in here, and I could keep it that way, but I could get the same information in other ways. So for example, I could turn this into an audio response. And instead of, if now it's going to delete my questions, but instead of making it a question where they select their answer, I could ask them to tell me out loud, to tell me why a rhombus is called a rhombus. What makes a rhombus, and see if they can respond that way. I could also make this a multi-select question. And I could change the question to a parallelogram and then choose my correct answers so that it's a little bit trickier for them. And always notice that you have an option to show your work. So you can ask your students in Show Your Work to create their own. So down in here, I could add some text and I could just say, draw your own parallelogram using the line tool. And then my students could go in, use the line tool, and they could draw their own. Just like that. So I'm just going to undo that for now. Now I have this same shape quiz using some other question types. So let me pull that one up. I'm going to go to the second shape quiz. And I just changed the question types. Now we have a lot of question types in Formative now. And I used this same type of question, but instead of creating a question where it was multiple choice, I am asking them to do a drag and drop. The drag and drop question type does allow each item to be dragged into more than one category. So when my students see this, when I go to preview it as a student, what they see is the ability to take each one of those shapes and drag it over to the appropriate area. So this is a quadrilateral, this is a parallelogram, but it is also a quadrilateral. So I can drag into more than one shape. We would encourage you to use other question types besides the multiple choice and the true-false, so that your students really get a better sense of some of these and allowing you to show your work and add on some show your work. Here's another example. How would you define a quadrilateral? Shape with 4 sides and 4 angles. You can put in your answer keys here. You don't have to list every answer here right up front. You can add those as you go. And then, of course, you can allow partial match, and you can allow show your work if you'd like to do that. I'm going to tag this to my standards, and I've got it in already where I can type in my quadrilaterals. Let's do this one here. And now I will be able to track this data. So I've got my Formative created. I'm using some different question types here. I'm going to tag these to my standards. And I've just created a very short one for today, just to give you some different ideas. What I want to pivot to now is how do we really do this securely? So we've got these different question types. We've got some different ways that students can respond. But our students, we really want to make sure that they're taking this in a secure way. And so what I want to do now is I want to look at some of our assign settings. Many of you have heard that we now partner with Respondus. And if you are a partner school or district, please do reach out to us and ask us how your school or district can become a partner with us with Respondus. I will put actually I won't put it in chat for the sake of those who are joining us later. I'm going to just show you in our help center, which is just help.formative.com. You can look for our article on Respondus to learn more about it if you haven't heard. But in Respondus, we do have a lockdown browser now where students are only able to open a Formative in the Respondus lockdown browser, and all other apps will close. And the only way they can exit that Formative is by receiving a password from the teacher or by submitting that Formative. So that is available now, again, for partner schools and districts. Please reach out to us if you have questions about that. But for everyone who is a partner, we do have other options as well that are already built in. So I'm going to take a look at some of those in our assign settings. Now, when you assign this to a class, always take a look at the additional settings. So you can choose to display each as a separate item, which is a great thing to do if you want to chunk things for your students. But let's take a look at each one of these here. One simple way to make sure that your students are not comparing answers is to make sure that you display the questions in random order. That way your students cannot text somebody or tell somebody that the answer to question 2 is such and such, because they don't know what question 2 looks like for their friend. So you can always turn on display questions in random order. Now, if you have a formative that has a multiple choice or a multi-select question, you will also see that on those questions, you can have randomized order, and you can turn that on here, and that will randomize the order of the items that you put into the question. So you can randomize the order of the answers. You can also randomize the order of the questions within the formative itself. So I'm going to display that here. I'm going to make sure to hit update in a moment. A couple other things you can do. One thing for tests is that you really want to make sure you look at this after submission. After submission, do you want your students to be able to go back and make changes? Do you want to make it hidden, which means they won't even be able to see it on their dashboard anymore? It will completely disappear. Or do you want to keep it visible with no edits allowed? In this case, they can actually open the formative. They can see what the questions were. And depending on what you select for correct answers and return scores and grade and correct answers, they'll be able to see that as well. One thing we highly recommend for end of year tests is that you make this hidden. After they submit, they can no longer see it. Now you can go back and change that at any time. So if you have a student that you want to have go back and return to a question, you can do that, but it's helpful if they can no longer see it once they submit it. Returning scores is the same thing. We would recommend that for end of year exams, you turn on don't show scores at first. That way your students have no idea how they did on this formative, and they can't let any friends know how they did on the formative. And again, you can always come back and change that, so that if you want to change it to after student submits and you take it off of make hidden, it will then show up. Notice we have this option for when closed. You have scheduled open and close times here. If you know that you are going to be giving this formative to a group of students at a certain time during the block of day or your first period or whenever, you can schedule it to open and close maybe at the end of that time period. Now, again, you can go back and change this later, but it is important to know that if you select when closed, their scores will go back to them once the formative has hit that close time. This is a great way to make sure that your students are all going in at the same time so that you can proctor and see their answers coming in live all at the same time. So that was return scores, don't show scores. And then return correct answers. Of course, we wouldn't want them to don't show answers. Now notice this doesn't have, when I clicked on this, there were no other options. That's because this automatically shows this way when you have don't show scores. If you change this and you make it allow edits or keep visible no edits allowed, then you will have options on when to return the correct answers. But the way we made it just now, make hidden and don't show scores, it also will not show their answers. So those are a couple of things to be on the watch for when you are setting for your students to take an exam. And again, once your students are finished with the exam, you can go back and change these so that they can go ahead and see their scores and their correct answers. Many of you have noticed the secure exam browser mode. That is where you will see that Respondus, the safe exam browser, Respondus lockdown browser show up here. That will not work for you at this moment unless you are a school or district partner who has asked for Respondus to be added. So just know that that's there at the moment for those schools who have asked for it, but you do want to reach out. These other ones are ones that are being phased out over time. So this is the one that we're working with now. Okay, so time limit, great question. This time limit here, a question came in about how the time limit works. If you want to, another way to provide some test security is to make sure that your students know that they have a given amount of time. So with this given amount of time, you can set a time and you can customize it. And that time can be done whether or not you have scheduled an open and close time. So you can create a time limit even if you don't have an open and close time. Now, the benefit of this is that once your students start the assessment, that starts the time on the clock. And that time limit does not stop. So they do need to finish the formative within that time period if they are going to have a time limit. Now, for students who have accommodations, notice that I have no students in this class needing accommodations for this particular one. If you have students who need accommodations and they have built into their IEP that they will always have a certain amount of extended time. One thing that we have done recently in formative, and let me come back over here to my classes, is we have made it so that you can create for your students extended time. I went to my classes tab just now. I clicked on the class that I was assigning this to, and right here you see accommodations, and I'm going to show this here. So I've got some students who I'm going to give some added time to, and the way I did that was I just clicked on Add Accommodations and this time limit extension here. You can toggle that on, choose how much extra time is needed, and update it. This particular student is not going to need that extended time, so I'm going to turn that off. When you do set a formative with a time limit, over here, if I set a time limit, let's say I give 30 minutes, notice that this changes here. So when there was no time limit, nobody needed that accommodation. When I change that time limit and I turn that on, it's going to show me which of those students need that time limit. And notice that you can change and edit the time for just this particular formative. So that way it makes it a little easier. You don't have to remember to adjust that time every single time for them. It gives you the option to change how much time you give them right there. Let me come back here. Another question was about restricting this to individual students. So yes, we have this ability here to restrict this formative to individual students. One thing you can do is, of course, if you have some accommodations that you need to give to students, you can provide accommodations. For example, maybe you need to do some audio directions for a few students. Maybe you needed to add some images for students. And then in that case, this is a very helpful tool, is to restrict this to individual students. But you can also do some minor changes. So one thing you can do is you can make a copy of the formative very quickly. You can call it the exact same thing. It will actually say cloned. I'm going to just say V2 for now, just for my sake, so that I know which one is which. I'm going to go back and change that title in a moment. Right now, everything is exactly the same, but I'm going to change this question, and I'm going to change this to say parallelogram. And then I'm going to update my answer here. So shape with 4 sides, 4 angles, and 2 sides and opposite sides are equal. I know that's probably not the way you would define it, but that's what I'm going to go with right now. So here's what I'm going to say for now. And then as more answers come in that I like, I can add those in. And then I'm going to say here, I'm going to change this to, instead of draw a quadrilateral, I'm going to ask them to draw a rhombus using the line tool. All right, so now I've got this other one very similar to the first one. I can set this for the exact same type of settings as I had the first one. So I can make this hidden. I can make don't show scores. I did add a time limit. So let me add a time limit, 30 minutes. But now, I'm gonna put that on separate pages and I'm going to display in random order. But now I'm gonna restrict this to individual students. And I'm just gonna go down my list and choose every other student starting with the top one. There we go. That one's gonna be assigned to them. Perfect. And if I come back to my original one, I can give the other one to the original students, the other students. So if I come in here and I restrict that to individual students, I could choose the other ones. And then my students would each have a different version of the formative. Now, what's so helpful about this is that if you have some students who need to do a retake in any way, shape, or form, you do not have to rewrite the assessment. You can come in and make minor changes to the assessment you had. Copy the assessment first, make a copy. On that copy, make some minor changes, keeping the same content, the same standards, but just making some minor tweaks to it, and then have those students retake. Even if you are doing something where you have uploaded your own content, you can do this. So I'm going to quickly, let's see here. I'm going to search existing items. And let me go over here to my, let's see, what was the name of that one? Actually, I will update it faster if I just go into my documents and grab it. Data, here we go. Let me grab this one here. So even if I've chosen to use a PDF file that I had, and I had added questions on it like this, and maybe I had kept them all multiple choice because that's what they were on my original question. Whoops, that should have been multiple choice. And here, so here we go. So maybe now on this one, instead of doing multiple choice, maybe this was originally all multiple choice. My students went in, they took it, and now I need them to take it again for a retake, but I don't want them to just go back in and now they know the answers. So now they're going to tell me what the answers are. So maybe instead of keeping the test exactly like this, when I copy it, so if I make that copy and I call this retake of figurative language, maybe it was originally the figurative language quiz and this is my retake. Now, instead of it being a multi-selection or what I kept picking multi-selection, it was supposed to be multiple choice. Instead of it being multiple choice, maybe I just changed the question and they already know what the answer was. They saw it from their friends. We went over it in class, but now I'm just going to say, tell me why this is an example of personification. Maybe I make the next one an audio question, audio response. Why is this a great example of a metaphor? So it's the exact same material, but I've changed the question to make it a little bit more difficult for them. All right, so those are some of the assigned settings. I do want to move over to our View Responses tab. So I'm going to come over to View Responses for a moment. Let me pull this up so you can see. This is the one that I assigned to my class earlier. I'm going to see some responses coming in. And here's my class that I'm going to be watching. Now, I've got two students pulled up here. Let me see if I can pull them up so we can see them coming in. Here's my first student, and then here is my second student. So I'm going to go ahead and open my Shapes quiz on this. And let's see here. So let's say that this student went ahead and started putting in their answers here. And put in all of the answers, quadrilaterals. And then over here, we've got the same thing. Notice they're in different order. I had selected to randomize those answer choices. And maybe I'll just put a few down here for now, because what I want to show you is this part on this next question. So we've got some parallelograms coming in. This one over here, this student is going to get this one wrong. All right. Now up here, we have Ron Weasley, and over here we have Elizabeth Schuyler. And if you know anything about those characters, Elizabeth Schuyler was very well known for being a great student. And so I am going to answer the question here, a shape with 4 sides and 4 angles. So there's my answer coming in there. Now let's say Ron forgot to study and he is a little bit panicked. I'm going to go ahead and just go to Google for a minute now. So of course, if I was in Respondus, I couldn't do this, but I'm going to go to Google and I'm Ron Weasley, and I'm going to look up for what is a quadrilateral. And he finds this great definition and he says, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to just copy and paste this. So I copied that and I come back over to Ron's answers and I paste that. Perfect. He thinks I've got it. And then of course he shows his work. And she shows her work. She uses the line tool like she's supposed to, and she makes it very neat. Here we go. Best as I can on this one here. Okay. And so let's submit. And we're going to just log out. And then I'm going to submit over here. And I'm going to log out. Submit. Log out. All right. We had these 2 students coming in. So as the student's work was coming in, I want to show you that when I go to number 2 and I'm grading these students' answers, notice that we've got some different, hers was automatically graded correct. I can see that was auto-graded. Now over here, something happened. It's a little different. I'm going to make this bigger so you can see it here. Let me make this a little bit bigger and zoom in. Let me do that one more time. All right. Doesn't actually make that bigger, but right over here, maybe you can see that there is an exclamation point. If I click on that exclamation point, it tells me what was copied and pasted. And it's going to tell me exactly, if I click details, it's going to tell me exactly what was copied and pasted. So if you're a world language teacher and they just found it was easier for them to find a character, an accent mark somewhere and copy it in, that's one thing. But if they copy the entire answer in, now you can give them some feedback. We need to talk about this one. I'm going to delay that feedback so that he doesn't get it right away. He's only going to get this once that time is closed. And that way I can make sure that we have a conversation about that. Something to know is even if he were to delete, copy and paste it, and then delete it and rewrite it, it would still show up as copied. So that's a helpful tip to know for that. The other thing you're going to see is that when you do click on a question, you can see the timestamps. So this is helpful if you are wondering if 2 students might have done a formative together who should not have. You can actually compare the timestamps for their answers as they come in. And then, of course, if you have a student, if you have enabled students to edit their answers, you can make sure the default is always set so that when you are in your settings, if a response has been edited after graded, you will get a notification right up here. But if you don't want that to happen, you can turn that off. However, if you want that notification, definitely leave that toggled on. So those are some ways. This was very tightly packed tonight. There was a lot to cover. Those are some ways that you can make sure that your exams are more secure. In our help section, which again is help.formative.com, you can also easily access it from Formative by going to the question mark and clicking Help Center. If you go to that Help Center and you want some more ideas or want to see some more examples of this, you can type in secure or exams or anything like that, and notice you'll see an article here on how to make assessments more secure and successful. And that will give you not just the ideas that we covered tonight, but some additional ones as well. Thank you so much for joining this evening. I do apologize for some technical difficulty at the very start for those who had joined. And we are glad that you are here with us. Do reach out if you have any questions. You can always reach us at partnerships.formative.com. And the other thing to know is that if you are interested in more trainings, or if you wanted to attend a training and missed it, you can go to training.formative.com. And we have many different trainings here that have been saved for you to view over time. There's definitely something for everyone here. So definitely take a look and see what's here and available to you. And always reach out if you have any questions. Thanks so much for joining. Have a great night.